All right, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at something that's
Okay.
pretty common online.
Yeah.
You've definitely seen it, but you probably haven't given it a whole lot of thought.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a short little snippet. Okay, so get ready because we're going deep today.
Yeah.
Diving into this story that is like just blowing up online right now.
Yeah.
This whole thing with this young girl claiming to be the daughter of Davido.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
You know him, right? The Nigerian music superstar.
Of course. Huge name.
Yeah. So we're basing this deep dive on this article from one of the big Nigerian entertainment news sites.
All right.
And let me tell you, it's not your typical paternity drama.
Oh, really?
It's got all these layers and like twists and turns.
Interesting.
It really makes you think about family and truth and just the whole, social media circus.
Yeah, I mean, what's so interesting to me about this is that it's not just like celebrity gossip. It's like real life colliding with these public platforms,
Right, yeah.
which always gets
Messy.
Yeah.
So for anyone listening who maybe doesn't know, Davido's at this huge Afrobeat star.
Yeah.
Fans all over the world. So when this girl, Ndu Adalek, posts a video saying like, hey, I'm his daughter, the internet like just exploded.
Yeah, I bet.
And then to make things even more
Crazy.
crazy, Davido's former lawyer,
Okay.
this guy Prince Ajudua, comes out and publicly denies it, saying that not one but 2 DNA tests were done
Oh, wow.
at like reputable clinics.
Yeah.
And they proved that Davido is not the father.
2 tests.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we've got the claims and the denials, DNA tests.
It's a lot.
It's intense. But what I thought was interesting was that Prince Ajudua, he didn't just like deny it.
Yeah.
He expressed concern for the Adalik family and the child too,
Right.
saying how like emotionally difficult this all is.
That's a good point, because a lot of times with these public disputes, you forget that there are real people at the center of it all,
Absolutely.
experiencing all this pain and confusion.
And of course, there's a whole social media frenzy around this story.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
The reactions are just wild. Disbelief, humor, conspiracy theories.
Oh, I gotta see this.
Some people are convinced that the girl's actually related to Davido's cousin B. Red. Like it's a whole other layer to the story.
I mean, it's crazy how social media turns everyone into like armchair detectives.
Right.
We see these little pieces of information and everyone just jumps to conclusions.
Yeah, filling in the blanks with like guesses and assumptions.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what keeps like nagging at me. What is the mother's motivation here?
That's a great question.
I mean, is she really convinced that Davido's the father? Or is this about money? Or maybe she's trying to like ride his wave of fame,
It's impossible to know for sure.
It really is. But it's so interesting to think about.
Yeah, but that's where we got to be careful, right? Because it's easy to get caught up in the drama and like create these stories that fit our own biases.
Sure.
The truth is usually more complicated than we think.
You're so right.
Yeah.
So tell me, why are we all so drawn to these celebrity paternity dramas?
Ooh, good question.
What is it about these stories that just keeps us glued to our screens?
Well, I think it's a lot of things. There's the whole appeal of like peeking into the lives of celebrities, right?
Yeah.
Uncovering their secrets, their imperfections.
Yeah.
And we all love a good family drama hitting truths. And, the idea that even these people who seem to have it all can have these messy situations.
Yeah, and let's be real, there's a bit of Schadenfreude in there too.
Oh, absolutely.
That little voice that says, see, even celebrities have problems.
Exactly. It reminds us that we're all human.
Right.
We all face challenges.
Right. But we have to remember that behind all the headlines and social media craziness, there are real people dealing with real consequences.
Absolutely.
Right.
This raises so many ethical questions, especially when you think about the child's well-being.
Right. And speaking of questions, there was this one comment on that viral video that I can't stop thinking about. It basically said, show us the receipts for these DNA tests. We weren't informed.
It's so funny. But it shows how much distress there is around this kind of stuff, especially with social media, where information spreads so fast and anyone can say anything.
Yeah, it reminds us that we can't just believe everything we see online.
Exactly. Don't take things at face value. Dig deeper, think about the source, and ask yourself, who benefits from this story?
That's good advice. It's easy to get caught up in the hype and lose sight of the bigger picture.
For sure.
Okay, so we've got the claims, the denials, the legal stuff, social media reactions, even Davido's silence. But the big question is, how do we know what's true in a world where anyone can just post their version of reality online?
That is the million-dollar question. And there's no easy answer. We are just bombarded with information all the time.
Right.
It's hard to know what's real and what's fake.
It's exhausting.
It is, but I don't think it's about finding the one truth, because often there can be multiple truths.
Okay.
It's more about looking at the information we have carefully, thinking about different perspectives, and recognizing our own biases.
So it's less about finding the answer and more about asking the right question.
Yes, exactly. Who are the sources? What are their motivations? What's being said and what's not being said? Once we start asking these questions, we can start to get a clearer picture of what's going on.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's easy to get emotional about a story, especially when it involves a celebrity we love or hate.
Totally. Emotions can cloud our judgment and make us easy to manipulate. That's why it's so important to think critically and approach information with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Okay, so let's look at this case. We have this girl claiming to be Davidos' daughter, a former lawyer denying it, and all this social media commentary. What are some key takeaways for our listeners trying to make sense of it all?
Well, first we have to acknowledge that we might never know for sure what happened, and that's okay.
Really?
Yeah. It's more important to understand that there are a lot of complexities here and different perspectives.
So instead of trying to choose a side, we should try to understand all the different viewpoints.
Exactly. Empathy is key here. Try to see things from each person's perspective, even if you don't agree with them.
That's a good point. It's easy to forget that we're talking about real people with real lives and feelings.
Yes. And that brings us back to being responsible online. Before we share or comment on a story like this, we need to think about how it might affect the people involved.
Yeah.
Our words have power.
You know, it's like that saying, think before you speak.
Huh.
It's even more important online because our words can reach so many people so quickly.
Absolutely. And beyond personal responsibility, we also need to think about the role of social media platforms in all of this.
Yeah, like in terms of shaping the story and protecting people.
Exactly. Social media companies need to be doing more to stop the spread of misinformation and create safer environments.
They need to be more proactive about taking down harmful content and stopping online harassment.
For sure. They have a responsibility to make sure their platforms aren't being used to hurt people, especially children.
You know, as we're talking about this, I'm struck by how much this whole story says about our obsession with celebrity culture.
It's interesting.
We're so drawn to the lives of famous people, but then we judge them so harshly.
It's a weird paradox. We want to know everything about them. We read all the gossip, and then we get mad when they don't live up to our expectations.
It's like we want them to be perfect, but we also kind of enjoy it when they mess up.
I think it's because we all want to feel connected and like we belong. We see ourselves in celebrities. Their successes and failures remind us that we're all human and that life is complicated.
That's deep. It's not just about gossip. It's about trying to understand ourselves and the world.
Yeah, and that's why it's important to think critically about these stories. They can teach us a lot about our own values, beliefs, and how we act.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into this crazy story, what are some key takeaways for our listeners? What can we learn from this that goes beyond Davido and this paternity claim?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that truth is hard to find, especially online.
Yeah.
We need to be critical thinkers. We need to question what we see and hear and consider different points of view.
So it's not about just believing or not believing something, but about really thinking about it carefully.
Exactly. And we also need to be empathetic and compassionate. We need to remember that there are real people behind these stories.
It's easy to forget that when you're caught up in the drama.
Right. And lastly, we need to be responsible online. We need to think about what we share, how we comment, and how our words might affect other people.
So before we jump to conclusions or spread rumors, we need to ask ourselves, is this true? Is it kind? Is it necessary?
Those are great questions to keep in mind.
And those questions lead us to one final thought-provoking question for our listeners. In a world where anyone can make claims online, how do we know what's true, especially when it comes to sensitive family matters?
That's a tough one.
It is. We'll have to explore that more in part 2 of this deep dive.
Sounds good.
So stay tuned.
All right.
That's a really good point. Things could get messy legally, you know?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Especially if someone decides to sue.
Exactly. I mean, we could be talking defamation lawsuits if either side made false statements publicly, especially if it hurt someone's reputation. And then, depending on how the laws work in Nigeria, it could get even more complicated when it comes to parental rights and responsibilities.
It's crazy to think about the consequences for everyone involved, especially the child.
Yeah.
I mean, it's already a lot to process. But imagine growing up with all this uncertainty and public scrutiny.
It really makes you think about the responsibility we all have when we're sharing or commenting on these kinds of stories online. What might seem like harmless gossip to us could actually have a lasting impact on the people involved.
Right. Especially a young child who didn't choose to be in this situation.
Exactly.
You're right.
Yeah.
It's easy to forget there's a human being at the center of all this. Someone whose life could be seriously affected by how this plays out.
And it all comes back to being careful about what we see and hear online.
Yeah.
We can't just absorb everything we see on social media. We need to question things, verify information, and consider people's motivations.
Speaking of questioning, I've been thinking about Davidos' silence throughout all of this.
Oh yeah, he hasn't said anything publicly, right?
Nothing. Yeah. Which just makes everything even more mysterious.
It's an interesting strategy. Some people might see it as an admission of guilt.
Right.
But we have to remember, everyone has the right to privacy, especially when dealing with sensitive personal stuff.
True.
He might be choosing to handle things quietly to protect his family and his reputation.
That's a good point. We're only seeing a small part of the story.
Yeah, there's a whole lot going on behind the scenes that we don't know about.
Okay, so we've talked about the claims, the denials, the legal stuff, social media reactions, and Davidos' silence. But there's one big question that remains. How do we figure out what's true in a world where anyone with a phone can share their version of events?
That is the question of our time, isn't it? And there's no easy answer. We live in a world where we're constantly bombarded with information.
Right.
It's so hard to separate fact from fiction.
It feels impossible sometimes.
It can be overwhelming. But here's the thing. It's not about finding the one truth, because often there isn't just one. It's more about looking at the information we have carefully and thinking about different perspectives and also being aware of our own biases.
So you're saying it's not about finding the answer, but about asking the right questions.
Exactly. Who are the sources? What are their motivations? What information is being presented and what's being left out? Once we start asking these questions, we can start to get a better grasp of the situation.
That's really helpful.
Oh.
It's easy to get caught up in the emotion of a story, especially when it involves a celebrity.
Oh, for sure. Our emotions can really cloud our judgment.
Yeah, and make us vulnerable to being manipulated.
Exactly. That's why critical thinking is so important. And having a healthy amount of skepticism.
So let's put on our critical thinking caps and look at this case. We have this young girl claiming to be Davidos' daughter, his former lawyer denying it, and all this social media frenzy. What are some things our listeners should keep in mind as they try to understand all this?
Well, the first thing is to acknowledge that we might never know the full truth. And that's okay. It's more important to understand that there are different perspectives here and that the situation is complex.
So instead of picking a side, we should focus on understanding the different viewpoints.
Exactly. Empathy is crucial. Try to see things from each person's perspective, even if you don't agree with them.
That's a good reminder. It's easy to get caught up in judging people online, especially when we disagree with them.
Right. We have to remember that everyone is dealing with their own stuff.
Yeah. And that brings us back to being responsible online. Before we share something or comment on a story like this, we have to think about the potential consequences for everyone involved.
Our words have power, and they can have unintended effects.
It's like that saying, think before you speak. It's even more relevant now with social media.
Absolutely. And we also need to think about the role of social media companies in all of this.
Yeah, what about them?
Well, they have a responsibility to create safer spaces online and fight misinformation.
Right.
They need to be more active in taking down harmful content and protecting users from harassment.
Especially when it comes to children.
Exactly. They need to make sure their platforms aren't being used to exploit or harm people.
You know, this whole situation really highlights our fascination with celebrity culture.
It does, doesn't it?
It's like we're drawn to famous people, but at the same time, we love to see them fail.
It is a strange thing. We want to know everything about their lives, but then we judge them so harshly when they don't live up to our expectations.
It's like we want them to be perfect.
Yeah.
And then we're secretly happy when they mess up.
I think it speaks to our need to connect with other people and feel like we belong.
Intriguing.
See ourselves in celebrities. Their successes and failures remind us that we're all human and that life is messy.
That's a good way to put it. It's not just about gossip. It's about understanding ourselves and the world around us.
Right. And that's why it's so important to think critically about these stories. They can teach us a lot about our own values, beliefs, and how we act.
Okay, so to wrap up this part of our deep dive into this complicated story, what are some key things our listeners should take away from this? What can we learn from the situation that goes beyond Davido and this paternity claim?
Well, I think the most important takeaway is that truth is often hard to find, especially in this digital age.
Yeah.
We need to be critical thinkers. We need to question what we see and hear and be open to different perspectives.
So it's not about blindly accepting or rejecting information, but about really taking the time to think about it.
Exactly. And another important point is to remember to be empathetic and compassionate. Remember that there are real people involved in these stories.
It's easy to forget that when you're reading headlines and comments.
True. And lastly, we need to be responsible online. Be mindful of what we share, how we comment, and how our words might affect others.
So before we jump to conclusions or spread rumors, we need to ask ourselves, is this true? Is it kind? Is it necessary?
Those are great questions to ask ourselves.
And those questions lead us to one final thought-provoking question for our listeners. In a world where anyone can say anything online, how do we tell the difference between truth and lies, especially when it comes to sensitive family matters?
Yeah, it's a question we all have to grapple with, especially as these kinds of stories become more and more common.
It really is like navigating a minefield out there.
Right.
Trying to avoid all the misinformation and people trying to manipulate you with their emotions.
It's exhausting, and it feels like the lines between what's true and what's fake are getting blurrier and blurrier.
They really are. That's why it's more important than ever to really sharpen those critical thinking skills.
Yeah.
We can't just passively take in information anymore. We have to be active participants, questioning, analyzing, verifying.
It's almost like we have to become digital detectives.
I love that.
Right.
Sifting through all the evidence and trying to piece together what really happened.
Exactly. And just like detectives, we have to be aware of our own biases.
Oh, absolutely. Because we all have these preconceived notions and beliefs that can totally distort how we see things.
It's so true. It's easy to let our emotions get the best of us, especially when a story triggers something deep inside us or reminds us of our own experiences.
Right.
So it's crucial to recognize those emotional triggers and take a step back.
Yep.
Look at the situation objectively. What are the facts? What's the evidence? Are there other perspectives we're not considering?
It's like having intellectual humility, admitting that we don't have all the answers and being open to changing our minds when new information comes up.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the heart of this whole deep dive, the importance of searching for the truth, even when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient.
Because sometimes the truth makes us question everything.
It's true. It can challenge our assumptions, make us confront our biases, and even make us question our own values.
But those are the moments when we can really grow and learn.
Exactly. It's when we feel uncomfortable that we have the opportunity to broaden our perspective and become more informed and compassionate people.
So we're leaving our listeners with this question about finding truth in the digital age.
Right.
But I want to add another layer to it. This story with all its twists and turns raises another interesting question. How do we handle situations where we might never know the whole truth?
Ooh, that's a good one. The mystery that lingers.
Right.
I think there's a certain beauty in not knowing everything. Life isn't always black and white, and sometimes we have to embrace the unknown.
It's about accepting that there might not be a perfect ending or a definitive answer.
Yeah, and finding peace in that uncertainty. It's about trusting our gut feeling, weighing the evidence, and coming to our own conclusions based on what we think is most likely.
So even though we might never know the complete truth about this particular story, it's been a great reminder about the importance of critical thinking, empathy, and being responsible online. It's a reminder that behind every headline, every viral video, every social media post are real people with real lives and real emotions.
Well said. And it's a reminder that in a world overflowing with information, the search for truth is a never-ending journey.
Yeah.
One that requires us to be constantly vigilant, intellectually curious, and willing to embrace the complexity of being human.
This deep dive has given us all a lot to think about. And to everyone listening, we encourage you to continue the conversation.
Yes.
What resonated with you? What questions are still on your mind? And most importantly, how can we all become more responsible, informed, and compassionate members of this digital world?
Let's keep challenging each other, learning from each other, and creating a more thoughtful and humane online space.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into this story that has captured the internet's attention and sparked important conversations about truth family and the power of social media.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking truth wherever it may lead.
See you next time.